1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello everybody, it's Marcus here. Welcome to the latest episode of Scuba Confidential. This week's going to be a little bit different. I've still got my good friends Louise and Ian with me.
Hello.
But this week we've got a special guest.
Hey.
So this week we've got Samantha Jane Howlett with us, and we're going to talk with her about various subjects, environmental and diving related. So with no more jabbering from us three scuba idiots, we'll go straight to Samantha. We'll see you at the end of the show. Okay, this week on the podcast, we've got a friend of the podcast and a friend of mine from way back, Samantha Jane Howlett. Hi Sam, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Marcus. Nice and early in the morning today.
Yeah, it is nice and early. So Samantha, I've known for about 10 years. You're a research scientist at the moment, doing projects in French Polynesia. You've also worked in the Seychelles, did your instructor training in Australia, and way back in the day did your dive master training with me, unbelievably, back in Cyprus. So we go back a way bit. Also with us, of course, we've got Louise and Ian.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
guys.
Nice to see you.
Now, I thought it would be really nice to get you on the podcast as an extra voice, someone who's got experience out in the field of seeing lots of different things. And for you to tell your story of what you do and your environmental concerns as well. I suppose the best place to start was how we kind of bumped into each other, which was back in Cyprus. Can you recall this far back?
Oh, spill the beans.
Back in
Of
2008.
course, you're my original mentor, Marcus, where my professional diving career began.
Good Lord. Mm. So what are your recollections of that season? When you think back, I mean, you were telling us just before we came on air about your initial struggles for accommodation when you came out to Cyprus, which sort of underlines how difficult it is sometimes doing a dive master internship. So where were you living when you first came out to Cyprus?
So I was being a little bit cheeky. I was 21 back then. So my best friend had signed up to do an summer art course out there near Paphos, and so she had free accommodation. And so originally I went out there pretending to be an art student so that I could get this free accommodation as well. And I couldn't hide that for very long at all because, they were asking me to sign up to all these different courses for painting, sculpture, drawing. And every morning I was like, sorry guys, I'm off diving, and jumped on my moped and drove off.
And then,
yeah. So it all came out one day where they're like, are you even interested in art? And I was like, no, I'm really not, sorry. I'm actually doing a dive master internship down the road. So, but they were a really great group of guys, and they didn't care at all. They found it absolutely hilarious. And we had a really good laugh about it.
That worked out well then.
yeah, that's fantastic. And then the rest of that season, of course, you then sort of honed your skills, and I remember us having a very good season out there in Cyprus and having lots of fun and messing around in the sea and mopeds and things like this, and it being sort of a really nice time when we were out there. But after that, obviously we went our separate ways. And what have you been up to since then, Samantha?
Oh gosh, all sorts of things. So while I was doing my dive master internship, that was when I started doing my bachelor's in animal biology at University of Gloucestershire. So I sort of started to think, okay, maybe I'm going to take a bit of an academic route. So yes, I did 3 years in Gloucestershire and worked on a whole range of different projects since then. So I'm not I've worked not just in marine sort of science, marine research, but I've done terrestrial projects as well. So I've worked in like Montana, I've worked in Africa, marine projects. I worked in Kuwait. I lived in the Seychelles for a while. Worked on a project in Ecuador. I've managed to get around quite a few different places. So I'm very lucky that I've been able to do these sorts of things.
Yeah, it's fantastic what you've been up to. And your most recent project's been in, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, is it Moorea?
Moorea, that's pretty close.
So French Polynesia, so you're just kind of northeast of the Cook Islands out in the Pacific there, which is about as far from civilization as you can get, I would suspect.
Yeah, you would say that. I mean, so the nearest island that most people will be familiar with is Tahiti and Bora Bora, these places that people go on their honeymoons. Tahiti is actually quite developed, and so like coastal development for a lot of the hotels is a big problem in these sorts of areas. But Moorea is a great place to work because it's just northeast of Tahiti and it's very underdeveloped in comparison. And so I'm affiliated with a French research base. So the research base there is called CRIOB, and it's affiliated with a university in Perpignan. So all the other PhD students and researchers on my project are French. I'm the only English person in this group. So I actually had a very funny story when I went over to Perpignan to meet everyone for the first time, and I haven't used French in years, probably since I went over on a family holiday when I was a kid, and I just really haven't used French language. And so I arrived and my friends said, let's go for a breakfast before we like go meet everyone. So I thought, okay. So we go into a creperie to have like nice pancakes and stuff for breakfast, and the shopkeeper said, bonjour. So I said, I know that one. Bonjour. So back to him. And then he says, bienvenue. And I was like, oh, no, I don't know that one. Maybe it's like hello again. So I said, bienvenue. Everyone starts laughing. And I was like, what did I just say? And they were like, you've just welcomed him to his own shop. So, okay, I'll stop with trying to speak French.
Yeah. That's the fun of it, is always having a go.
Yeah.
So,
he looked at me and was like, English? I was like, yes, English.
So have you, in your time out there, have you adapted to learn or pick up, reinvigorate your French, or have they just started talking English to you?
So they talk a lot of English. So CRIO was founded way back in 70s or maybe even earlier. And it was historically always a very French organisation, but it's grown through the years and it's very international now. So you have researchers from all over the world there. And so they do speak English very, regularly, except the Monday morning meetings where we organise who's taking which boats for the week, who's surveying where, and that's all in French. So I can say, Monday morning, I will be taking the Alu 5 to the outer reef slope at Piahina. That's what I can say in French.
Sounds a great office.
Yeah. Fantastic. So for people who are complete laymen to environmental science and what you do, can you explain to us kind of what your project is doing and undertaking and what you're looking to achieve from it while you're out there?
Yeah, so I'm part of a wider project called Reef Services, and we're composed of a bunch of like PhD students and postdoc researchers. And so Reef Services, basically our aim is to look at, in the future, in the face of all these climate changes, what are going to be the effects for the local people that rely on these ecosystem services. So like they rely on food and nutrition, they rely on coastal protection, they rely on tourism. And so we all taking different aspects of the reef ecosystem and trying to define them, and so we understand more about reef resilience, and so we can be more targeted in how we protect the reefs in the future. So my project is specifically looking at how, when I talk about ecosystem processes, I'm looking at the ecosystem process of grazing by fish. So when you get a big storm and you get wide-scale coral bleaching and the reef gets destroyed, you get a lot of algal growth. And if you don't have healthy populations of herbivorous fish to keep that algae in check, then it becomes proliferated with algae, the coral get out-competed, and so you get what is called an ecosystem transition sometimes, where it moves to a different state. So it's no longer dominated by coral, it's dominated by these tall stands of algae, and it just turns into a completely different system. And so a lot of people have done research on the types of fish that are important for performing these ecosystem functions. And, you know, it's important to have different groups of fish because they all feed in different ways. But we don't really know, like, what drives the abundance of these fish. Most people just assume, oh, well, there's lots of algae, so there'll be lots more herbivores. But that's not really the case because they feed in different ways. They have different nutritional requirements. And so part of my project is to try and understand, okay, well, following on from bleaching, what are the changes that we see that could, you know, benefit some fish more than others? And then you can then infer what the impact on the reef would be because you have more of these fish, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I did a very good job.
So do we do anything to encourage the fish to eat the algae, to try and turn that back to coral?
Well, we can't encourage the fish to feed, but if we understand their nutritional requirements, so we can understand where they will be more likely to feed, then we understand the system more. So the other aspect of my project, it's sort of in two parts. So we use biomass of fish, so the weight of fish that you have on the reef, or the species richness of fish, so how many different species you have, as indicators of a healthy system. So historically the thinking was, okay, well, if we have a greater diversity of species, then we have a healthier system. We're knowing now that that's not necessarily true. So we have something that we call like functional complementarity and functional redundancy. So within the group of fish that we call herbivores, we actually know that some feed more similarly to others, whereas some feed maybe more differently to other species. And so when you have wide-scale kind of like bleaching, the way that the communities will respond is different. So some species can be more important than others. So, for example, the best example of this is parrotfish. So most of the listeners will know what parrotfish are. They're very bright, colourful, conspicuous fish on the reef. They're very pretty. But they're a very important group for the reef because the way that they feed, so they've got these really strong beak-like jaws. And so when they feed on the substrate, they really rasp and they really clear away like all the algae, different to like how maybe like a surgeonfish or a tang picks at it. You know, a parrotfish is just going to really clear that substrate, and so it's more likely for coral to be able to come back and grow. But there's studies now showing that like as the parrotfish grow and they become bigger, their jaws become bigger, their jaws become stronger, so they perform these functions in an exponential rate. So if you use biomass as a proxy, you think, oh, well, we've got loads of fish on the reef, but if you've got loads of smaller fish, they're just not going to scrape away and bite away as much as maybe the larger individuals.
So it's having the right diversity of species. So almost the parrotfish come in like the bulldozers to clear the big chunks of algae that then allows the smaller species or the less the species with less strength in their jaws or wherever they've evolved to then clear what remains, I guess.
Yeah. So like you say, bulldozers is a really good analogy because they just really clear everything away. And then the surgeonfish will come and then they'll just like really pick, because they feed very, very rapidly, and they'll pick everything away. So we understand that we need to not maybe target these fish. So in French Polynesia, for the local people around Moorea, the common fishing method is spear fishing, and they really target these big parrotfish. So what we can try and do is encourage protection of these species, especially like having the marine parks where they can't fish these, and so you keep these big parrotfish species. And then just understanding the function that these fish perform, we can adapt the management practices for that. So I'm using long-term data sets from Creo. So they've been monitoring since the 80s. They've got sites, which is really great because you don't have these really long-term monitoring data sets in many places in the world. And so I'm going back through the data, and a lot of people have looked at how biomass of fish changes in response to disturbances, how species richness and community changes in response to these disturbances. But one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to follow individual fish out on the reef, and I'm going to see how often they feed, when they feed, the bite size that they have. And so one of the aims is to calculate, all right, well, if we have this survey data, what do we estimate the actual grazing pressure is by the species that we have and the size of that species?
Wow.
So you can almost drill it down to a parrotfish of a given size will clear this quantity of algae within certain tolerances. And you get an idea of that in the kind of populations you need for the reef to be healthy in a longer term.
Yes, that's very astute of you, Marcus. That's exactly it. So we want to understand thresholds. So we need to know what is the minimum amount we need of these types of fish to perform this function effectively. So
that's interesting stuff. So
almost like a time and motion study.
Well, kind of, kind of.
A time and motion study underwater.
So getting back, I mean, that science, for me at least, and I'm sure for the people listening out on iTunes and Stitcher and all these places where we put the podcast, will be fascinating. What I'm also interested in is what you do kind of day to day. But before that, I know, because I've been talking a lot and you've been talking a lot, as you should. You're our guest. But I think Louise has got some questions for you as well.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pass you over to Louise, and she's going to just ask you a couple of things.
Okay.
So, hi, Sam.
Hi, Louise.
So I've been reading about the amazing work you've been carrying out over the past few years. So, like you say, you've worked in so many places, from Ecuador to the Seychelles. Absolutely fascinating reading. And slightly envious as well. So with the various locations that you spent time working in, where to this date would you say has been your favourite place to work, and what made that place so special?
I actually have to say Moorea is the most incredible place I've been in terms of marine life.
Okay.
So I worked in the Caribbean. The Caribbean as a marine ecosystem is very trashed.
Right.
So not only is it overfished, but they also had, I think it was in the 80s, die-off of like the diadema sea urchins, which are really important algal grazers there as well. So the combination of those factors means that a lot of the areas in the Caribbean is really, really trashed. And I learned to dive there. So this was my first view of the underwater world. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. Over 3 months, I saw like one spotted eagle ray and like stuff like this. So for me, as my first view on the underwater world, I thought it was incredible. But since then, and you go to different places and you see how reefs can be, I can look back now and think, oh, wow, okay, yeah, it's not as healthy as you can't see that there's all those problems there if you have nothing to compare it with, I guess. But Moorea just has so many things there that I haven't seen in other parts of the world. So for one, it's the coral there is really resilient. So it's very rare that in parts of the places, other reefs in the world, they have these really big impacts, like crown of thorns and storms are the main ones that affected Moorea. And coral cover's gone down to less than 3%.
Really?
But what's absolutely incredible about this part of the world is that within 10 years, that coral cover has become straight back. So when I was there this year, it's 100% coral cover in parts of the reef. The diversity of species has changed, which is interesting. So we're seeing how reefs are maybe adapting to be slightly different in the future. But the coral cover is still there. The fish that are associated with the reef is still there. The sharks, so I mean, I would go out and do field surveys, and you would pretty much every day see a black-tip reef shark. Quite often you'd see lemon sharks, white-tip reef sharks. For me, I haven't really experienced that. Like Seychelles was incredible. The landscapes are incredible. There's lots of reef-associated fish. They don't have the sharks there. They do actually have an artisanal fishery in Seychelles, so it's legal for local people to fish them to some extent, which is probably a little bit controversial. People will review how sustainable that is in the future. And maybe I love Moorea so much because I was very lucky to swim with humpback whales.
Oh, wow.
And that
Fantastic.
was just an absolute dream come true. So maybe that just sold it for me.
Yeah, see why, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes. So, I mean, it was a little bit sad because everyone wants to swim with the whales. There's a really big tourist industry for this. And some people abide by the law more than others. So I asked around for a reputable company that other people have been with, other people at the research base have been with, and everyone always said the same company. So I booked to go with them. And so there's laws like you can only approach the whales with a boat a certain distance. In the water, you can only approach from a certain distance. You have to stay certain group sizes. And the company that I went with did abide by all of this. But there were a couple of times when we went out and we saw other companies that weren't. And so it was really sad because we were in the water. There were two groups of us and we were just hanging out in the water, and you could hear this male humpback singing somewhere below you in the depths. You could hear him singing. It was absolutely incredible. And so we were waiting, hoping that he would come up and take a breath and we could see him as he came by. And in the time that we were waiting for him to come up, 5 other boats turned up. So there were 7 boatloads of people in the water. And when this poor whale came up, he didn't really know where to go. It was so crowded that he just took off. And it was very sad for me to see such a beautiful creature, that I'm there and I want to be respectful of him, to have to face something like this. So yeah, I mean, it's great that we can do these things, and I'm not saying to people that they shouldn't necessarily do these expeditions, but the experience is much more special when you stick to the laws that are in place for a reason.
There has to be boundaries in place, isn't there? And they have to be adhered to, more importantly.
Exactly. You've got to be respected.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think that sort of ties in with what we talked about on the last podcast about our gripes of, and on a very small way. I mean, I've never been lucky enough to see a humpback, but obviously dealing with places where we'd see manta rays on lucky days, where there'd always be one person with a GoPro who had just managed to just go head first at the manta and just chase it away, and it's unnecessary, and it's bad for the animal, and it's bad for the other people there who are trying to observe the wildlife. So I'm a bit draconian with that. And you trained with me years ago, so you know what a stickler I am for some things. So anyway, yeah. Lou, what else have you got?
Yeah, so in relation to that, kind of really, my other question was, what challenges do you encounter most often while conducting your scientific studies, and how do you overcome them?
That's a really funny question, actually, because I really encountered that in Moorea. So part of a PhD is you have to come up with really new ideas of, you have to be making your contribution to science, which is a big challenge, especially for coral reef research. There's lots of people out there researching reefs. And so I came up with an idea of an experiment that I wanted to do. And I thought about it, wrote it down on paper, and I was like, all of this is going to work. And then when I got out there, a lot of what I thought was going to work didn't work at all. So long story short is I wanted to take some coral fragments from the reef and incubate them in an aquaria that I kept at a elevated temperature. So I'm looking at how algal colonization patterns vary after the coral dies through heat stress. And even just keeping coral in an aquarium is challenging, I realise. So the water has to have a lot of movement, it has to have a lot of water flow through. You have to manage the salinity. So we had intake pipes from the bay, and when there was a lot of rain, that dropped the salinity. There were issues with even people forgetting to turn pumps on in the morning and all sorts of things. So even just getting this set up took ages. And And one of the other challenges that you face is you're working in a very remote place, so you just don't have access to a lot of things and equipment that we maybe take for granted. And so you really have to just think sometimes, okay, that didn't quite work how I expected it to. What else can I try?
Back to the drawing board.
Yeah. So, and I was just really grateful that there were lots of people at Creo who have experiences with aquaria, and so very regularly I'd be like, this isn't working, and lots of people would give me suggestions, and so they were very helpful. So I got a lot of help, which was great.
Thanks to social media and programs like the Blue Planet, we've seen a real increase in the general public becoming a lot more aware of the threats to the planet, in particular marine life. And that's in turn seen an increase in eco-tourism. So a lot of people are choosing to be a bit greener with the way they holiday. In your eyes, from what you've seen, do you think that eco-diving resorts live up to their promises and ethos?
I mean, I'm not really sure how much I can say about this because I haven't been myself specifically with a dive industry or a hotel that has advertised themselves or made it like their thing that they're eco-friendly. The only thing that I guess I can say is, so another thing that they do in Moorea is they do tiger shark dives. Ooh, go and dive with the tiger shark. But as anyone who's done a lot of diving knows, if you want to see these really cool marine species in the wild, it's right place, right time. And a lot of the times when you go out there, you're just not going to see them. You have to just be, like I said, in the right place and then hope you have that encounter. But for a lot of people that maybe spend a lot of money to come on these holidays, they want to be guaranteed that interaction. And so there is a really big practice, unfortunately, of them feeding the tiger sharks to draw them in and then bring them in close. And so, I mean, obviously we don't know how that is going to affect sharks and the way they interact with people in the future, changing their behaviour. We don't know the impact it's going to have on their ecology, and we don't know how that's going to affect our safety in the water in the future. So there was one dive operator there, and he's really advocating to stop this practice. And I mean, it's not completely altruistic because when we went out on the boat that day, as he put it, and I completely agree, we have to manage this before there's an incident, before someone gets bitten maybe, and then no one can go out at all. So for him to protect his dive industry in his business, he wants it to be done right. So we went to a place called the Vallée Blanche, the White Valley. So it's this big channel, and there's a lot of current, and the sharks regularly sort of cruise around there. And the first dive we did was great. I'll say I didn't see a tiger shark, but I saw a whole bunch of different sharks, and I saw loads of them. We saw grey reef sharks, lemon sharks, black-tip reef sharks, white-tip reef sharks, loads of them hanging out. And the first dive was great. We just sort of chilled, the sharks were moving around, coming in and out and doing their thing. It was really, really nice. And the second dive we went down, we noticed a boat came over during the surface interval and some other divers went in the water. And we went down to the same place where we were, no sharks whatsoever. And we were sort of hanging out thinking, what's going on here? And as we went to the other end of the valley, we found all these remains of fish where they'd been feeding the sharks. So all of them had just gone from the area and just piled in where these people had been. So you can really see these beautiful animals, but you don't have to influence their behavior. I think you can do it in the right kind of way. I still had a really amazing experience, but you don't need to draw these animals in and things like that. So
you can see them from the start.
Well, I think it's the not interfering with their natural behaviour. Even in like a marine park, you might find in parts of Southeast Asia where they'd feed turtles from the boat and be throwing bananas in and things like this. And then, of course, there's this habitual thing and this Pavlov response where then the turtles come in when they hear the boats expecting the banana, but that day the boat's not stopping and it just gets mowed down by the boat. And it just becomes, we just need to observe and not play any part in
You shouldn't
influencing
be changing
their behaviour.
No.
That's just, you're the expert, Samantha, not me, but that's just my humble opinion.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in that field, but I would also agree with you. And I think we need to not put pressure on ourselves that, like, right, I'm going to go to Moorea and I'm going to see a tiger shark. No, just go there and just see what the marine life is and just enjoy the experience. And don't feel like if you leave there and you haven't seen what you came to see, that it's, you know, a wasted experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's so much beauty in the ocean anyway. To see something like that would just be the cherry on the cake.
Yeah.
Rather than I'm going.
It shouldn't be the norm.
And unfortunately, there is. I mean, you're from the UK as well, of course. But in the UK, when you hear people booking holidays, whether you're at the dive show or wherever you happen to be, they'll talk about it in terms of, I'm going here to see X. As if it's some kind of guarantee, like a zoo, where you will go there and you'll see things. And I'm the same as you. It's the right place, right time. I think I'd done like 700 or 800 dives before I saw my first manta ray. And that was just by luck and being in the right place at the right time, you know.
And do you find it makes it so much more special when you do have an encounter with, you know, manta ray or humpback whale? It makes it so much more special. You feel so much more privileged to be in that situation at that right time.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. You feel like you're sharing their world, and it just really heightens the experience, I would say.
Excited to get a chance to see dolphins.
Lou, do you have any other questions?
No,
for
that's
Samantha?
it. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, so we're gonna. I know you're a very, very busy woman, but we do have some sort of general questions we're going to split amongst us that we ask all guests that are going to come on the show. And the charming debonair Mr. Ian's going to ask you the first question.
Yeah, okay. So, first off, what we've got is what is your you've seen humpbacks, you've seen sharks and those. What is your favourite aquatic life?
So my favourite aquatic life. This is actually a really easy question for me. So my favourite sighting that I've ever had on a dive was of a giant grouper in Seychelles. So this is Epinephelus lanceolatus, if you want the scientific term for the fish.
You're just
and
showing off
it's also known as the Queensland grouper. So these guys can get huge. You see pictures from the old, like way back fishing, and you've got like these almost 3 meter long fish. And in Seychelles, my favourite, like I used to love this, they have these old Seychelles wild legends of like small children would go swimming and get swallowed whole by these giant fish. And there's not a lot of mystery left in the world anymore, which is a little bit sad, but when I was working in Seychelles, I was very lucky. I got asked to just help out on a project doing some monitoring on one of the outer islands. So this is quite far away from where most of the people live. There's not as much fishing pressure. And we were diving on the reef, and we just saw this huge shape, like giant sausage-like shape, and we were like, what is that? And we slowly got a bit closer, and we could see that it was a giant grouper. And I love groupers in general because they've just got so much character. They're a territorial fish, so if there's somewhere that they usually hang out, you can find them quite regularly. When we do our dive training in Seychelles, we have one spot where we do the deep dive, and there's a grouper there called Jim. Because we would sometimes go there, and part of the deep dive would break an egg and you pass it round to each other. Jim quickly realised there was this snack that would turn up every now and then. And so he would come and hang out. But they're just really funny, really quirky fish. And just to see this amazing creature that is IUCN Red List, is data deficient. We have no idea about what their population status is other than they're decreasing. So it was just super cool. Yeah,
I've never seen one, but I because I know they can grow up to about 2.5, 2.8 meters, something like this.
Wow.
It's like a coffee table swimming by, I would imagine.
Wow.
But to see one in the flesh, because most groupers you see are the length of your forearm or something like that. So to see something that size, a grouper with those big lips like Mick Jagger would be would be incredible. Yeah, that's fantastic.
I think in terms of length, it was the same size as one of my buddies, but it was just so much fatter and it was just it was insane.
Fantastic. Okay, I think the next question's from Lou.
Yeah, cool. So touching back on our last episode, so pet diving peeves. What's yours, Sam?
Well, I guess because I'm a biologist and I mostly go to these places to see the marine life, my pet peeve is when someone scares away the marine life that's the main thing for me there to see. So I think one of the questions was favourite dive site. So I can probably tie this in with that. So my favourite dive site that I ever been to is the Yongala wreck in Queensland.
I know it,
I'm not sure if you guys been.
I've not been, but I'm aware of it. I think it sank 1911, sits in about 33 metres of water, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've never done a dive where you just see so much in one go. Like, as we were descending down, there were sea snakes coming up and down to breathe. At one point, I had a guitar shark here.
Oh, wow.
I had a manta ray on the other side of me, green turtles swimming around. And I have my camera, and I sort of thought, I don't even know where to look. Like, this is just insane. And yeah, so unfortunately, there was one guy there who had one of these GoPros on the extender stick. And I even got a picture of, like, so the manta ray was super curious. I think you hear people say this about them, that they can come and check you out and look at you.
Yeah.
And that's really what this guy was doing. He was circling around us, and we were just sort of like holding still, like, oh, wow, how cool. And then this one guy just sticks his camera in its face, and he goes, and then swims off. And we were just like, oh, come on, guy, like, why do you have to do that? And there is actually a giant grouper that lives on the Yongala as well. There's a really cool news article that I read. A diver gets his head stuck in fish's mouth, so I'm not really sure how he got this interaction with this
fish. Are
fish.
you sure about this? This wasn't like one of those wild nights back in Cyprus, was it? Where...
It wasn't me that got my head stuck in this fish's mouth. But when I was reading about this dive site, I saw this article. I thought, that's hilarious. How that happens.
Yeah.
Don't put your head where it's not supposed to go. Don't peek through portholes, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they give you the dive briefing at the beginning, and as I was saying, these fish are territorial. So he said, when you get round to the bow, there's this big cave where you can, you might be lucky and you can see him. And as we started to come round, I could sort of see the outline. And of course, GoPro guy swims straight at it, and it's gone. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna throttle you on the surface. like rein that camera in.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was. I mean, it didn't bother me that much because 2 seconds later there was something awesome swimming by. So I mean, that dive was just absolutely incredible. If you want to have an awesome dive. And, I mean, like we were saying, you can never guarantee these things.
Sure.
But, like, I mean, the schools of the big trevallies and the big jackfish and things like that, there was just fish everywhere. It was insane.
Fantastic. It's so pleasing to be somewhere like that where you see healthy reef systems, you see a healthy ecosystem, with so much diversity of life. It must be so, certainly for you as a scientist, it must be so pleasing to see.
Yeah, well, the Yongala is actually... the reason why you get so much stuff there is because, it's quite a long boat trip out from the land. And so when you get away from the reef and you're in more of what we call the pelagic open ocean zone, then there's less variation in the habitat. So you get less variation in species. But when you get a wreck, you get areas where fish can hide, fish can aggregate. You get a whole different habitat. And so a lot of fish come in and make use of this space. And so... you get a real congregation of species, which was really, really cool.
Awesome.
Excellent. Now, we've got... I think I'm next to ask a question, unbelievably. Since, obviously, you left me, you became an instructor and you completed your IDC out in Australia. What's been your kind of favourite bit of becoming an instructor? I know the sort of things that I enjoy about teaching. And who's your funniest student? I remember you telling me about Turtle Lady. So I need to, when you said Turtle Lady, when you sent me a message, I was like, I need to know about Turtle Lady. You have to tell me this.
Bless it. So I guess the first thing I can say about becoming as an instructor is it actually taught me a lot. So being like a scientific diver, you're used to diving with people. They know how to dive. You don't have to explain anything to them. They know what the situation is. You're not responsible for them. But when you start teaching, especially you're teaching Discover Scuba dives and open water dives, and these are people, is their introduction to diving, they don't know about buoyancy. How do you explain good buoyancy to someone when you're not used to phrasing that in really simple terms? So that was really eye-opening for me, and I realized that nowadays I take a lot of stuff for granted for diving, and I had to really think back. Okay, well, what was it like when I started diving, and how can I help people to understand and get these concepts? And then going on from that, turtle lady. So bless her. When we first started doing our first dives at the open water course, and you're descending into, you're saying you raise your low pressure inflator and lean forward ever so slightly so you can control your descent. She just couldn't control her body. She didn't know how to hold herself, and every single time, guaranteed, ever so slowly onto her back, and then down she would go.
Yeah.
And she's, after we tried this a couple of times, she was like, I just don't get it. I mean, and then I remember this was after the first day I was talking with one of the instructors. So I was like, how do you explain to someone how to control their own body? Like, I'm not used to explaining this to someone. And in the end, one of my friends who'd been working as an instructor for a long time, he was like, sometimes you can try and encourage them to do a skydiver pose. So think of yourself as a skydiver. So that way you're orientating yourself onto your front. You can put your hands there to stabilize you. Maybe that will help you. And I mean, that did, that really actually did help her. She could visualize a bit more what she had to do. But yeah, I mean, me explaining this to someone that had never, it was a learning experience for me as well.
I think so. I think being an instructor can be really joyous, and it can be incredibly frustrating. Sometimes you think, why can't you do that? Why can't you bend your legs? Or I've said to be flat in the water. Why are you upright like a seahorse? So it's difficult because. Yeah. And I don't want to sound arrogant, but obviously for the likes of us talking here who've done hundreds of dives over the years, then you do take it for granted. And for us, going for a dive, it's just like going for a walk around the park, isn't it? It's just something you do, and you don't have to consider your buoyancy or control or finning and these kind of things.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay, I think that's pretty much the end of our list of questions. You've been absolutely wonderful, Samantha, so thank you for coming on. Guys, have you got anything else you'd like to ask Samantha before we wrap things up a little bit here?
No, not this stage. No, I don't think so.
No, we're good. So, from memory, you're flying back to French Polynesia soon, is that right? To carry on your research?
Yeah, so I go out in February. So when I've recently come back a couple of weeks ago, I set up this experiment and I put it out in the field, and so now hopefully when I go in February I'll have lots of data and it'll all be worth it.
And then the report writing begins, does it? Okay.
The report writing, analysing data and writing, but that's all the fun stuff, obviously.
Okay. Well, it's been really wonderful to have you on the podcast. You've been fascinating to listen to, and you've explained really articulately what you do and what you do is your project, and some of the stories have been fantastic, so I'm sure hopefully the listeners will get that same impression. We'd love it if you stay in contact obviously with what we're doing on the podcast and come back on at some point and let us know how you're doing.
That'd be good.
For the purposes of what we're doing now, we're going to end it here and wish you well, Samantha, and stay in touch. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Great to speak to you.
Bye.
Thanks very much, guys. It's been great.
Well, there you go, guys. We hope you enjoyed listening to our discussion with Samantha there. We certainly enjoyed doing it, and we're going to try and get her back on early next year to find out what she's been up to and talk about various other subjects. I think for now, that's pretty much the end of the episode. Anything you guys want to add?
No, I thought it was just really good.
It was really insightful and really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I certainly enjoyed it, and so that's pretty much it. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Scuba Confidential. Bye.
See ya.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Scuba Confidential. We really appreciate you tuning in today. We'd like to clarify that we're in no way affiliated with any agency or organisation. All opinions expressed during this podcast are our own.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at Scuba Confident 1, Instagram and Facebook at Scuba Confidential, and if you'd like to support us via Patreon, go to patreon.com/Scuba Confidential. Any contribution is really appreciated. Additionally, if you have any suggestions for topics or discussions, just let us know at scubaconfidential@gmail.com. Many thanks to Plunkett Music for the groovy tunes, and we'll catch up next time. Until then, keep diving.